Welcome to the Dino Dean Show, and I'm your host, Dino Dean, the Dean of Talk Radio. We have a power-packed show lined up for today. The call-in number is 646-200-0067. Once again, that call-in number is 646-200-0067. You guys can hit me up on Facebook, Dino Dean Show. You can also follow me on Twitter, Dino Dean Show. You can also shoot me an email, and that email address is dinodeanshow@hotmail.com. In our second segment, he's back with us, Dr. Delbert Blair. He will be talking with us about the smart meter, very interesting device that electric companies are installing on homes across America, and it is another way Big Brother is spying on us. But in our first segment, we have on air with us psychiatrist, author of the book The ISIS Papers, the fantastic Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Welcome to the Dino Dean Show, Dr. Welsing.
Yes, I'm very glad to be with you today. Mm-hmm.
Yes, ma'am, and I thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. And the first thing that I did want to ask you is this. Could you please explain to the listening audience the Cress theory? That's your theory. Please let us know what that is.
Well, the Cress theory, I'm a general psychiatrist and child psychiatrist, and back in 1967, 68, I was training in psychiatry, and I realized that racism was causing mental health problems for black people, and I wanted to understand what racism really was. And moving from Neely Fuller's work, I was exposed to his ideas that we were dealing with a total system, that racism was a global, local, national, global system for maintaining the power equation of white power over a relative non-white powerlessness. And so I wanted to understand, why would this power equation, why would this particular power structure exist on planet Earth? And so I started looking at some of the things that were being said within the framework of the system of racism. One was that black people were supposed to be genetically inferior to white people. And another thing, that black people were supposed to be a minority. Now, the reality of planet Earth is that people who classify themselves as white are a tiny minority, fewer than 1/10 of the people on the planet. And rather than black people being seen as genetically inferior, black people are genetically dominant, and white people are genetic recessives in terms of skin coloration. So black people could cause white genetic annihilation. And from understanding that, it's like doing I call the Cress theory a psychogenetic analysis into looking at why do white people behave in the way that they do. So at the same time that they are saying black people are a minority and other people of color are minorities, they in fact are the minority on planet Earth. And instead of black people being genetically inferior, it's people who classify themselves as white who have a genetic deficiency condition, and this is not Francis Welsing making up an illness. White skin is albinism. Albinism is a genetic deficiency state defined by white people when they're talking about other animals, but they didn't apply it to themselves. But being a physician, I understood what it was and said that white skin is not superior. It is a genetic recessive trait, and it is a mutation from black. And so understanding that, you can understand why white people want a suntan. Now they are engaging in putting, especially males are, putting tattoos all over their arms, almost like painting their arms black. So suntanning and tattooing are ways of making people who really wish they had color but do not have color themselves, but at the same time they are projecting that black people are ugly because they have skin color. And black people, I would say almost at the 99% level, have internalized that they are supposed to be ugly because they have skin coloration and because they are not don't have the genetic deficiency state of albinism. So I went from that point to understanding, taking it further, that people who classify themselves as white, as a tiny minority population on the planet, that if they did not control all of the people of color, then they could experience white genetic annihilation. And I say that this is the core behind why people who classify themselves as white behave in the way that they do. They do everything to prevent their genetic annihilation on a planet where they are a tiny minority, which means that they have to control all of the people of color, and especially the men of color, because it's men who can impose sexual intercourse. And it is black men, of all of the men on the planet, who are feared genetically because black people have the greatest genetic potential to cause white genetic annihilation. And if any of your listeners don't quite understand what I'm saying, just look at our president, President Barack Obama, who is a black man, but his mother was white and his father was black. But because white is a genetic recessive trait and black is a genetically dominant trait, the combination of the white plus the black does never equals a white person. It's always a person who would be one or another shade of black because of black genetics dominance. So I say that this is the key, and the subtitle of the ISIS papers is The Keys to the Colors, that this is the thing that black people and other people of color have not understood for the past 500 years. And we have been trying to figure out what do we need to do so that people who classify themselves as white cease abusing black people in one way or another. We just went through last week a black man who said he was innocent. Many people said he was innocent, but he had to be killed anyway by the state of Georgia. This is not peculiar to that one black man. The history is replete with black men being killed and the killing being justified, even when so-called police officers kill black men, and then they say, well, it was justifiable homicide. That there has to be the possibility of killing black men whenever the urge comes forth. Otherwise, people who classify themselves as white cannot feel consciously, subconsciously. They cannot have a sense of psychological security based on what I'm saying, the analysis, that their fundamental fear is the fear of white genetic annihilation, and the perceived threat is the black male. You see, so if you are subconsciously carrying in your mind that the person I fear most is a black male because he could genetically annihilate me. And, you know, a little while ago they put up a statue in Washington, D.C., honoring Dr. Martin Luther King, a black man who was also killed as he tried to pursue the issue of justice. Well, Dr. King posited that the answer was that people should love each other. Well, if everybody on the planet loved each other, and that was expressed in terms of sexual activity, white would disappear on the planet because it's a genetic recessive trait.
Right.
And so Dr. King, do you see, even though people talked about him in political terms, the thing that he was pursuing was justice. And as long as people who classify themselves as white do not come to terms, consciously come to terms with their fear of genetic annihilation, which controls all of their behavior.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Cressing, Dr. Welsing, I'm sorry, I have another question to ask you. And it's a very simple question, but can be complex as well. Can black people be racist?
No, because racism is power. In other words, black people do not have power over people who classify themselves as white. I mean, if a black person stood in the middle of the street and said they hated white people, that does not mean that black person has control over the life and death, the livelihood, over all areas of people activity for white people. But when people who classify themselves as white, because they have put themselves for the last 500 years, they have placed themselves in the position of power on the planet. So when they determine that they are going to practice racism, and this is why it's critically important that black people understand racism is white supremacy. White supremacy is racism, and it is the only racism operative on the planet. So
Absolutely.
black people can call white people names. Ideally, they wouldn't. And my discussion is not about hating white people. You see, hate is something that people feel when they feel vulnerable. But once you are able to analyze and fully understand why people do what they do, it's like playing the game of chess. If you sit down at the chessboard and your opponent is playing the white side of the chessboard and you're playing the black side of the chessboard, hating your opponent doesn't allow you to win the championship. What you have to do is be able to understand the game. It's just like playing football. A football team doesn't waste time hating their opponent. They have to understand first and foremost the game of football and be able to play that game, playing offense, defense, offense with expertise, but it's based on understanding football. Do you see? And we're in the position as black people of it's as though we were on a football field with a tennis racket.
Oh, my goodness.
Do you see, where we don't, and this is why black people greet each other by saying, hey, what's happening? What's happening?
Right.
That's said 1,000,000 times a day amongst black people because we don't understand what is going on. We have been misinformed and told that it is a democracy and everybody is equal. But black people keep running into the reality that that is not the truth. We are in a system of racism, white supremacy, a total system that is structured for white genetic survival on a planet where the white people are a tiny minority and they're genetic recessive in terms of skin coloration. And as in the work of Neely Fuller Jr., he says the system operates simultaneously in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And where we are vulnerable is because we haven't understood that we're dealing with a system, and we have attempted to deal with problems in economics as though they are somehow isolated, or problems in education, or problems with the law, or problems with politics.
Dr.
These
Welsing,
are just expressions of the system of racism, but if you don't understand the system of racism, then you just keep running and trying to put this fire out and try to put this fire out and try to put this fire out until you die with a heart attack or a stroke from stress.
This is the Dino Dean Show, and the call-in number is 646-200-0067. We are on air with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. And Dr. Welsing, what you just stated, the economics and all of those things, so you're basically saying these are just symptoms of the problem of white supremacy. Exactly.
Do you see, the problems that we see in economics are huge and major, just like the problems in education, the problems with labor in